Rome, autumn. The cold wind cuts through the rain-soaked streets. Streetlights flicker against the glistening cobblestones, while traffic crawls forward, impatient horns blaring beneath the distant wail of a siren. A black car pulls up along the curb. The engine stays on, a low, steady hum in the damp night air. Inside, Keanu Reeves watches the city through the fogged-up windshield. His face is partially hidden in shadow, but his eyes are locked onto something. Or rather, someone. On the sidewalk, a girl walks through the rain. No umbrella. The hood of her sweatshirt is down, letting the water run through her damp hair. She grips the straps of a worn-out backpack, her head slightly lowered. Keanu follows her with his gaze for a few seconds. Then, he lowers the window. "Excuse me." The girl freezes. Her breath catches for an instant. Slowly, she turns. Her eyes, wide, uncertain, meet his. For a moment, everything seems to stop. The sound of the rain, the traffic, the world itself. Keanu studies her. There's something familiar about her. "It's you," he murmurs, his calm voice carrying a deeper meaning. Silence. Only raindrops hitting the pavement. The girl takes a step back. An instinctive, defensive movement. Keanu doesn't look away. "Wait." His voice is steady, yet gentle. She tightens her grip on her backpack. Her chest rising with an uneven breath. Then, just as she seems about to respond. Blackout. 48 hours earlier. The scent of rain and wet stone filled the air. The cobbled streets of Trastevere glistened under the streetlights, as the city seemed to take a breath between one downpour and the next. Inside the small corner restaurant, Giulia moved swiftly between tables, balancing a tray with 2 steaming plates. She had been working there for over a year, but every night felt longer than the one before. The place was small, intimate, with old photographs of Rome hanging on the walls and the aroma of pasta alla matriciana lingering in the air. Only a few customers remained at this hour, just a couple of tourists whispering over an open guidebook, and a handful of locals finishing their meals. Giulia sighed quietly, wiping a hand across her forehead. Closing time was near. And that's when she saw him. A man sitting alone in the most secluded corner of the restaurant. A black cap pulled low over his forehead, a dark leather jacket draped over his frame. His hands were clasped together in front of him, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if bearing the weight of something unseen. He hadn't ordered anything in a while. His glass of water sat untouched. Giulia approached, trying to be discreet. "Everything okay, sir? Would you like anything else?" The man lifted his gaze just slightly. His eyes were dark, deep, marked by a weariness that didn't seem just physical. "No, thank you," he replied, his voice low, calm, his accent unmistakably foreign. Giulia nodded and walked away, but something about him unsettled her. She couldn't quite explain why. He seemed hollow. As she returned to the counter to tidy up the last few glasses, she heard the faint sound of a chair sliding back. She turned just in time to see the man rise from his seat and head for the door. And that's when she noticed it. A black wallet on the floor near his table. Without thinking, she picked it up, opening her mouth to call after him, but he was already out the door, vanishing into the rain. Giulia hesitated. She looked down at the wallet in her hand, then around the restaurant. Her shift was practically over. She took a deep breath, grabbed her jacket, and stepped out into the night. The rain hit her face instantly, icy against her warm skin after hours spent inside. She scanned the street for him, her heart beating faster than it should. She spotted him just a few meters away, standing under a glowing sign. Hands in his pockets, gaze lost in thought. Giulia stepped closer and, raising her voice to be heard over the rain, called out, "Hey! Wait!" The man turned sharply, visibly surprised. She held up the wallet. "You forgot this." For a moment, the man remained still. Then, slowly, he approached. He took the wallet from her hands, his eyes never leaving her face. "Thank you," he murmured. Giulia noticed how tightly he held it. As if, for a moment, he had thought he'd lost something far more important than just money or documents. Then, He looked up at her again and said something that struck her more than it should have. You didn't open it, did you? Giulia raised an eyebrow, confused. Should I have? The man held her gaze for a long moment. Then, a faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips. No. You shouldn't? He glanced away for a second, as if choosing his next words carefully. What's your name? Giulia. He nodded, almost to himself. Nice to meet you, Giulia. I'm Keanu. Her eyes widened slightly. The name sounded immediately familiar. But before she could piece her thoughts together, Keanu Reeves had already slipped the wallet into his pocket and disappeared around the corner. Giulia stood there, rain pouring down on her, a strange feeling tightening in her stomach. She didn't know why, but she was certain, this wasn't just a coincidence. The next day, Rome, Trastevere, morning light filtered through the fogged-up window of the small restaurant. The scent of coffee and freshly baked croissants filled the air, blending with the clatter of dishes and the first orders of the day. Giulia tied her apron around her waist, tucked a pen behind her ear, and stepped up to the counter. Her shift had just begun, yet a sense of unease weighed on her. She couldn't stop thinking about the night before. That look. Those few words. Keanu Reeves. By the time she realized who he was, he had already disappeared into the night. And now, as she poured coffee into a cup, she wondered if she would ever see him again. She didn't have time to finish the thought. Giulia. The firm voice of the owner made her turn sharply. Paolo, the restaurant's owner, stood with his arms crossed, his expression tense. Come to the back for a moment. Giulia set down the coffee pot, surprised. She wiped her hands on her apron and followed him into the small storage room behind the kitchen. As soon as the door closed, Paolo ran a hand over his forehead, as if searching for the right words. What did you do last night? Giulia's eyes widened. What? You left the restaurant without permission. During your shift? Paolo, it was the end of the night. I just ran after a customer who forgot his wallet. I don't care. There are rules here, and we can't afford employees who do whatever they want. Giulia stared at him, incredulous. You're joking, right? I did it out of courtesy. I didn't do anything wrong. Paolo shook his head. Giulia, this isn't the first time I've told you to stay in your place. This is not a job for people who want to play hero. A sudden chill crept into Giulia's chest. You're firing me. It wasn't even a question. Paolo took a deep breath, then nodded. Yes. Silence. Giulia stood still for a long moment. Then, she felt her heartbeat quicken. She couldn't believe it. After a year in that place. After all the double shifts, the extra hours, the difficult customers, and the nights spent cleaning until closing. For what? For doing the right thing? Paolo, do you realize how ridiculous this is? It's nothing personal, Giulia. But I need people I can rely on. She lowered her gaze, clenching her fists. There was nothing left to say. You have 30 minutes to collect your things. Paolo turned and walked out, leaving her there, her heart pounding, her legs heavy. Giulia ran a hand through her hair and closed her eyes for a moment. Then, with a shaky breath, she untied her apron and folded it slowly. It was official. She had lost her job. Afternoon, Giulia's apartment, the scent of coffee had long since faded. Giulia's small kitchen was wrapped in silence, broken only by the soft tapping of rain against the window. On the table, next to a half-empty mug, lay her phone and a scattered pile of job listings. She had read through them at least 3 times, but each option seemed more impossible than the last. She sighed, burying her face in her hands. Fired. The word echoed in her mind, relentless. She had saved enough to cover rent for another month, maybe 2, but after that? She had no one to rely on. No family nearby. No backup plan. Shaking her head, she tried to push the thoughts away. She turned on the TV, more to fill the silence than out of real interest. A smiling talk show host appeared on the screen, seated in front of a sleek, modern backdrop. Tonight, we have a very special guest. An actor who needs no introduction. Ladies and gentlemen. Keanu Reeves. Giulia's head snapped up. Her heart skipped a beat. On the screen, Keanu appeared, sitting in an armchair, his usual modest smile in place. His hair was still slightly damp, as if he had just come in from the street. The host adjusted his jacket, studying him with curiosity. "Keanu, there's a lot of buzz around your latest film. But today, we want to ask you about something different. Something that happened right here in Rome." Giulia tightened her grip on the remote. She had a feeling something insane was about to happen. Keanu lowered his gaze slightly. For a moment, he seemed to hesitate. Then, in his calm voice, he said, "Last night, something happened to me that really moved me." The host leaned forward, intrigued. "Tell us." Giulia held her breath. "I was in a small restaurant in Trastevere. It had been a rough day." "A really rough day?" He paused. "I was about to leave when I realized my wallet was gone. I hadn't even noticed. But then, a girl followed me into the rain to return it." A chill ran through Giulia's spine. The host nodded, curious. "And what struck you the most about it?" Keanu ran a hand through his hair, as if still processing the thought. "She didn't open it." The audience fell silent. "She just saw me as a man who had lost something. Not as a celebrity. Not as someone famous. Just a person." A lump formed in Giulia's throat. Keanu offered a small, almost wistful smile. "Little things like that remind me that kindness still exists, even when you least expect it. And now," he turned toward the camera, "I want to find that girl. I want to thank her in person." The remote slipped from Giulia's hands. Her heart pounded against her ribs. This couldn't be real. And yet, Keanu Reeves was looking for her. Giulia's phone vibrates. Notification: "Sophia, Giulia. Turn on the TV." The next day, Rome, city streets. The air was colder that morning. The sky, still heavy with clouds, threatened another downpour, while Rome moved as it always did: honking horns, hurried footsteps, distant conversations. Giulia walked without a clear destination. She had spent the night awake, unable to stop thinking about what she had seen on TV. Keanu Reeves was looking for her. It was madness. Complete absurdity. And yet, it was real. She pulled her jacket tighter around herself, trying to focus on something more immediate: finding a new job, fixing her problems, not getting caught up in fantasies that made no sense. Then, a sound made her freeze. Phone vibrating. A new message: "Sophia. Giulia. Where are you?" She frowned, confused. Another message: "Go online. Now." Her heart skipped a beat. She opened her browser, her fingers moving automatically as she typed Keanu Reeves' name. The first headlines made her eyes widen. Keanu Reeves searching for mystery girl in Rome. I want to find her. Who is the waitress who stole Keanu Reeves' heart? Live TV appeal: the actor wants to thank a stranger. A shiver ran down Giulia's spine. She barely had time to process it. A dark car pulled up beside her. The sound of a window rolling down made her turn sharply. "Excuse me." The world seemed to stop. Keanu Reeves was there. Sitting in the car, his gaze fixed on her, just like the night before, in the rain. Giulia felt her breath catch in her throat. He studied her for a long moment, as if making sure she was really the one. Then, with a light, almost incredulous smile, he said, "It's you." Streets of Rome. A few minutes later, for a long moment, Giulia couldn't move. The city kept flowing around them, the sound of footsteps on whetstone, distant car horns, the chatter of tourists. But for her, everything had stopped. Keanu Reeves was looking at her. Not through a screen, not in a photo or a viral video. For real? Giulia swallowed hard. She felt trapped in a reality that didn't belong to her. "Get in." Keanu's voice was calm, low, but carried an intensity that left no room for hesitation. Giulia tightened her grip on her backpack straps. Her instincts screamed that she should run. What was happening? Why was he here? "I just want to talk." Keanu tilted his head slightly, studying her. "If you'd rather, we can walk." Giulia remained silent for a moment. Then, without a word, she took a step back. Keanu nodded slowly, as if he had expected that reaction. He turned off the engine, opened the door, and stepped out of the car. He was dressed simply, dark jeans, a black leather jacket, his hair still slightly damp. There was nothing artificial about him. No bodyguards. No wall of fame keeping them apart. Just a man and a woman, in the heart of Rome, on rain-slicked streets. How about a coffee? Giulia raised an eyebrow. Keanu gave a small, almost shy smile. My treat. She hesitated again. Then, without even knowing why, she nodded. Okay. Keanu gestured toward a small cafe across the street. They walked in silence for a few moments, wrapped in the crisp autumn air. Giulia could hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears. It was ridiculous. All of this was ridiculous. But as they stepped inside the cafe, and Keanu took off his cap, the few customers inside turned to look at him. A brief silence. Then, whispers. A man at the counter gripped his coffee cup, unsure if he could trust his eyes. A girl in the corner raised her phone, ready to take a picture. Keanu didn't seem to notice. He approached the counter with ease and smiled at the barista. A coffee for me. And for the young lady? Giulia took a second too long to respond. Huh? Oh. Cappuccino. The barista nodded, still a bit flustered, and quickly got to work. Keanu turned toward her, hands in his pockets. I imagine you have a lot of questions. Giulia stared at him for a long moment. Then, she crossed her arms. Just one. Keanu raised an eyebrow, amused. Why? The actor's smile faded slightly. Why am I looking for you? Giulia nodded. Keanu ran a hand through his hair, his gaze dropping for a moment. Because it's not often you meet someone who reminds you how important kindness really is. Inside a cafe, Rome, a few minutes later, Giulia slowly lowered her gaze to the cappuccino in front of her. Her heart was still pounding, but the warmth of the cup in her hands forced her to focus on something tangible. Something real. Keanu Reeves sat across the table, his coffee untouched. He watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read. So? You went through all this just to thank me? Her voice came out sharper than she intended. Keanu didn't seem surprised. I wanted to know who you were. Giulia let out a small sigh. I'm just a waitress who lost her job for doing the right thing. He held her gaze for a moment, then tilted his head slightly. Is that why you look like you haven't slept? Giulia tightened her grip around the cup. I didn't expect it to end this way. Keanu gave a slow nod. And now? What will you do? I'll find another job. I'll figure something out. Giulia looked up, and for the first time, she saw something familiar in his eyes. That same exhausted, empty expression. She had seen it the night before, on his face, as he sat alone in the restaurant. And suddenly, before she could stop herself, the words slipped from her lips. What about you? Why were you there alone? Keanu held her gaze for a moment, as if the question had caught him off guard. Then, he gave a small smile, one without joy. My sister is in the hospital. Silence. Giulia felt her breath hitch for a second. Oh. I'm sorry. She's been fighting for a long time. But yesterday was a hard day. Keanu picked up his cup, turning it slowly in his hands, but never taking a sip. I went out to clear my head. I didn't want to talk to anyone. Then I lost my wallet. And you showed up. Giulia lowered her eyes. Keanu cleared his throat. It's rare to find people who do something without expecting anything in return. He paused, then added, and I want to return the favor. Giulia looked up at him, confused. What? Keanu reached for his jacket, slipped a hand into the inside pocket, and pulled out a sealed envelope. He placed it slowly on the table, right in front of her. What is it? Open it. Giulia hesitated. Then, with slightly trembling fingers, she took the envelope and tore it open. The moment she saw what was inside, her breath caught in her throat. It was a check. A sum she had never seen in her life. Her head snapped up. Keanu. I can't accept this. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady on hers. It's not charity. It's an opportunity. An opportunity for what? Keanu gave a faint smile. To start over. Inside a cafe, Rome, a few minutes later, Giulia's heart pounded in her chest. The check was still there, trembling between her fingers. A sum that could change her life. And yet, all she could do was stare at it. I can't. Keanu remained silent, waiting. Giulia looked up at him, trying to find the right words. It's too much. I didn't do anything to deserve this. Keanu took a deep breath. You did more than you think. Giulia shook her head, letting out a short, bitter laugh. Why do you keep saying that? I just returned a wallet? Anyone else would have done the same. Keanu held her gaze, serious. No. Not everyone would have. His tone was calm, but so firm it sent chills down her spine. You didn't stop me out of curiosity. You didn't look inside? You didn't try to figure out who I was. Giulia froze. Keanu ran a hand through his hair. You have no idea how many people, over the years, have tried to get close to me out of self-interest. How many have faked kindness just to get something in return? He lowered his gaze for a moment, as if haunted by an old memory. But you didn't? You were kind simply because you chose to be. And to me, that means more than anything. Giulia bit her lip. Part of her wanted to believe him. But another part felt lost. Keanu studied her for a few seconds. Then he spoke again. If you don't want to accept the check for yourself, then use it for someone else. Giulia raised an eyebrow, confused. What? Start something. Something of your own. A place where your kindness can make a difference for others. Giulia stared at him, speechless. Why are you doing this? Keanu gave a faint smile. Because someone once did it for me. Silence. Giulia slowly lowered her gaze back to the check. Outside, the rain had started again, softly tapping against the cafe windows. She had a choice to make. A few weeks later, Rome, the morning sun filtered through the streets of Trastevere, casting light over shop signs and cafe tables set out on the sidewalks. The air carried the scent of fresh coffee and warm bread, as the city woke up to its usual, bustling rhythm. But for Giulia, this morning felt different. She stopped in front of a small storefront. Her storefront. The sign above the door was simple, unpretentious. But to her, it meant everything. Her heart pounded as she slid the key into the lock and slowly pushed the door open. The inside was still bare, but the scent of fresh wood and paint filled the air. A small cafe, her dream, one she had never dared to say out loud. And now, thanks to Keanu Reeves, it was real. Giulia ran a hand through her hair, still in disbelief. Had this really happened? She had spent the past few weeks buried in plans, permits, and sleepless nights. Every step had felt impossible, and yet, here she was. She had made it. A sound behind her made her turn. Standing in the doorway, with a quiet smile and a cap pulled low over his eyes, was Keanu Reeves. Giulia crossed her arms, shaking her head with a smile. I never thought I'd see Keanu Reeves standing outside my cafe. Keanu gave a small smirk, tilting his head. Well, I invested in this place. Had to make sure it was real. Giulia laughed, more relaxed than she had felt in weeks. Come in. This one's on me. Keanu stepped inside, looking around with quiet curiosity. Giulia moved behind the counter and switched on the coffee machine. So, what can I get you? Keanu leaned on the counter, his smile light but knowing. A coffee. But only if you promise me one thing. Giulia raised an amused eyebrow. What? Keanu folded his arms. Don't let success change you. Giulia stilled for a moment. She met his gaze, and she understood. Keanu Reeves knew what it meant to lose yourself in the chaos of life. Then, she smiled, as the aroma of the first coffee filled the air. Promise. Inside the cafe, Rome, a few minutes later, the steaming cup of coffee sat on the counter, its aroma blending with the scent of fresh wood and the soft tapping of rain against the window. Keanu wrapped his hands around the cup, savoring its warmth against his skin. You know, I've always believed it's the little things that change the world. Giulia looked at him, curious. Like a coffee? Keanu gave a small, knowing smile. Like kindness. Giulia lowered her gaze to her cup. For years, she had believed the world belonged only to those who pushed harder, who fought their way through, who didn't waste time on trivial things. But now she wasn't so sure. She lifted her eyes to Keanu and nodded slowly. "You're right." He held her gaze for a long moment, then set his cup down and extended his hand. Then, "Good luck, Giulia." She hesitated for a moment, then shook his hand firmly. "Thank you. For everything?" Keanu took a step back, lowered his cap slightly, and made his way to the door. Giulia watched as he opened it, the soft drizzle still falling outside. He turned one last time. "We'll meet again." Then, he disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind only the quiet chime of the doorbell as it swung shut. Giulia stood still for a moment, as if trying to imprint the scene in her memory. Then, she turned toward the coffee machine and took a deep breath. The scent of coffee mixed with the fresh rain drifting in from the open door. She stood behind the counter, her gaze fixed on the half-full cup Keanu Reeves had left behind. Had this really happened? Just weeks ago, she had been standing in the rain, without a job, without hope. Today, she had a new beginning. A second chance. But this wasn't just a story about her. It was proof that a simple gesture can change everything. Giulia thought back to that rainy night. Returning a wallet had been something small. Instinctive. Normal. And yet, it had made a difference. Not because of the money. Not because of the success. But because of what it meant. Because in the end, what really matters? Money? Fame? Or the way we choose to treat others? Keanu Reeves could have simply thanked her and walked away. Instead, he chose to do something bigger. He chose to prove that kindness still exists, and now, it's your turn. Have you ever experienced a moment where a small act of kindness changed your day? Or have you done something for someone without expecting anything in return? Share your story in the comments, we read every single one. If this story moved you and you believe in its message, leave a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to discover more incredible stories that make you think, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Thank you for watching until the end. Your support means the world to us. And remember, kindness costs nothing. But it can change everything. See you in the next video.